Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Rונית.
Hi.
Very good to see you.
Very good to see you too. Hi, and welcome to the digital edition of the Jerusalem Writer Festival in משכנות שאננים. My name is Rונית Vered. I'm a food writer for Haaretz, and I will be speaking with Professor Michael Pullen, one of the leading voices in the current food movement and the attempt to change modern food systems. It's a great honor and a privilege. Michael shaped the way a lot of people around the world think about the food that we put on our plates. He's doing it through his teaching at the academy, through his journalist work. He's a frequent writer for the New York Times, the New York Book Review, and other publications, and through his books. He writes about topics that he wants to know personally more about, I think, and I find interesting as well, such as gardening and food and architecture, and more things that we will talk about soon. 4 of his books has been translated to Hebrew, among them The Botany of Desire, The Omnivore's Dilemma, and Cooked. His latest book, How to Change Your Mind, will be published in Hebrew this month, at the end of this month, I hope. The subject surprised a lot of people. I hope we get to talk about it a little bit more later. And I just want to say on a personal note, that I love your books, Michael, not only because of the vast scientific research and the historical and political context, but because you're a great storyteller, which is one of the most important things. And even when you choose to tell stories which are so complicated, like the food system story, you can feel through your words, your curiosity, your affection for people, and you're passionate for good food, which is also one of the things I admire. So we're gonna dive into world catastrophes and pandemics and a lot of grief very soon. But it is Israel, and we can't do without the Jewish point. And I know you come from Jewish origin. So tell us a little bit about your background, and does it have anything to do with your attraction to the food subject?
Yeah, well, thank you, Rונית. It's wonderful to be here. I've always wanted to come to this Writers Festival, and Zoom has made it possible this year.
I still hope to host you next year.
I would so much prefer to be there in person, because I've never been to Israel, and I'm eager to come. So I come from a line of mostly Eastern European and Russian immigrants, and my grandfather, who has passed away, came here in 1917, fleeing Russia at a time when there was, enormous pressure on Jewish population. And he came as a young man. He was 17, and started selling potatoes on the street in New York, and gradually got into the produce business. So he was involved with food for a long time. By the time I knew him, he'd moved from produce to real estate, although even that was logical, because his produce business put him in contact with all these farmers on Long Island, which used to be an agricultural hub near New York. And when they wanted to sell out, he started buying their land and building things on it. And but he never lost his love of produce. His idea of a good time was to go into the produce section of a supermarket and hold up a tomato and say, look at this, 59 cents a pound, with this strong Russian accent. This is outrageous. I could grow it for pennies a pound. And he had a very large garden, even into his 90s. He lived to be 97. And I love spending time with him in his garden. And he really inspired my love of gardening. In my first book, Second Nature, there's a memoir where I talk about him. So there is that connection, and that love of the land, and that love of
potatoes, who runs through our blood. Yeah.
Yes, the potato, my favorite crop. I'm actually about to plant my potatoes today or tomorrow here.
Tell me a little bit about your garden. This is something you mention a lot in your books. It's like your region.
My work begins in the garden. My first book was all about gardening. It was my experiences in the garden sensitized me to all the issues I write about, whether it's, how does a farmer deal with pests without destroying the land or himself? How do we turn, sunlight and water and soil into these marvels that we, so enjoy eating? So it was that experience really that inspired me to write. And my first book, as I said, was about what I was learning about nature in my garden. So for most of my life, I've had a garden. There've been periods like in my early 20s where I was living in New York City and couldn't have a garden. But whenever I can, I've planted something. And right now I live in Berkeley, California. That's where I am. And at the end of this room, this long, narrow room, if you looked out that window, you would see my front. I have a garden in the front. I don't have the classic American lawn, which I've objected to forever as just a waste of good agricultural space. And I have 3 raised beds because we're in a city, so I don't have a lot of space. I have 3 raised beds. I have a few more in the back where I raise as much as I can in a small space. So right now I have bush beans growing. I've got escarole. I've got broccoli, all kinds of lettuces, peas. And it's pretty full right now, actually. I just put out squash, summer squash and winter squash, and tomatoes, none of which are quite ready yet. But
yes.
And this year, because of the pandemic, I actually ripped out some of my flowers and planted more vegetables because, look, feeding ourselves has become much more important. It's not just a hobby. Anything that allows you to avoid going into a supermarket right now, you want to do.
Yes. So this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I feel in a way, I want people to understand some of the ideas that you put so well in your books. And I'm 3rd generations of farmers, originally from East Europe, but here in Israel, I grew up in a small village in the center of Israel. And I think my grandparents had more connection to the soil than my parents do, or I do. It was during my parents' generation that something really profound changed about the way that we feel about soil and about growing our own food. Can you explain a little bit what happened in our parents' generation?
Well, I think there was a rejection. You see this in a lot of cultures. Leaving the farm represented progress. There was a lot of propaganda in America that, farmers were yokels, they were stupid, they were the butt of all sorts of jokes. There was a kind of cultural rejection of agriculture that coincided with the cultures, the society's need to get people to work in factories. And so I interview lots of farmers, and they would tell me that the guidance counselor at school, the person who decides really, or advises you on whether you should go to college or not and what college to go to, they would always take the A students and, convince them, you got to get off the farm, you've got to go to the city, you got to go to university. And there was a brain drain in agriculture in America. And so the prestige of farming became quite low, and certainly in my parents' generation, not my grandparents. They had admiration for it. But I think it was a kind of organized campaign, basically, to populate the factories, especially after World War II.
What happened after World War II?
Well, we as a society, we put our effort into industrializing farming and food in general. A few things happened. One was all the research went into how much food could you grow with one person. And we made agriculture incredibly efficient, so that one farmer now can take care of 1,500 acres of wheat or corn or soy. And this was our goal. We measured the success of our farmers by productivity per farmer. And because we wanted less farmers and we wanted more people in the cities and more factory workers. And that we succeeded. It was a big research program. It had to do with breeding, the Green Revolution, and coming up with these, very fast growing crops that required a lot of fertilizer to grow. But if you gave them fertilizer and they all were bred to come to mature at the same moment. So you could go one pass with a combine and harvest everything. Plants don't normally grow that way. They pace their productivity to cover their bets from an evolutionary point of view. But we got everything. We got every tomato, every corn plant to be ready at the same moment. So we mechanized the whole process. And this, look, this worked. And it was by some measures incredibly successful. We grow there are only 2 million farmers left in America, a country of 330 million people. That's an astonishing fact that, for most of history, a sizable portion of your society had to be devoted to producing food. And now we don't. But I think we've also learned the dangers of such a system, that if you're growing food with productivity in mind, you're going to be growing these commodity crops like corn and soy and wheat that can't be eaten directly, but need to be processed, either passed through the gut of animals, because most of what we grow is animal feed actually now. And then the animals are no longer raised on farms because that's not as efficient as putting them on feedlots. So you go down this path where food becomes very cheap, very abundant, but the system becomes very brittle, very fragile. And that, I think, is exactly what we're learning right now with the pandemic, which has been an incredible education in the downsides of a hyper-industrialized food chain at every link in that chain.
Can you talk a little bit about what these hyper-industrialized things or society did to the environment and to the planet?
Yeah, well, the goal was cheap food, right? And that is
a good goal, yeah.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean,
the intentions are good, yeah.
The intentions are good. The idea is to make food available, to make, meat for most of history was a luxury good that only the wealthy could afford most of the time. Now, everybody can afford meat just about. And we eat, in America, 9 ounces of meat per person per day, which is, enough meat to eat meat at every meal. That's an amazing blessing to a lot of people who wanted to eat meat and couldn't. And as a percentage of our income, we spend less than 10% of our income on food. That too is, you can argue, a great blessing. That leaves money to spend on lots of other things. But cheap food has a high cost. And we see it in the environment, especially. Because to grow food that way takes lots of chemicals on the farm, because labor and chemistry are in this relationship, and the more chemistry you have, the less labor you need. So one farmer can farm 1,500 acres because he can spray herbicide or pesticide and doesn't have to, be that close to his plants. He can have fields that are separated by 50 miles. Because his GMO soy, his Roundup Ready soy, he sprays it basically in advance. So there's great convenience in this system for the farmer, which allows him to get bigger. But there are other environmental problems too. The water supply in our farm belt is badly polluted by nitrogen fertilizer. I don't think people realize that to grow these hybrid crops that were developed during the Green Revolution and since, you need lots of nitrogen fertilizer, which is itself made from fossil fuel, and is, when it's put on the fields, farmers put out a lot of it. They regard it as crop insurance. So they put out more than the plants can absorb. And when that nitrogen gets wet, it's ammonium sulfate. When that nitrogen gets wet, it turns into nitrous oxide. And that is a very powerful greenhouse gas, much more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. And that's a huge contributor to climate change that's on nobody's scope. Every time we plow a field again, which we do repeatedly, carbon is released into the atmosphere. So agriculture, makes a tremendous contribution, not just to water pollution, but to air pollution in the form of climate change. And then you've got, pesticides in the food supply, which are a cause of cancer. And so you know, cheap food has come at a high price. And I haven't even mentioned, you know, farm workers and what it's like working on these farms. You know, you're exposed to lots of chemicals, and it's backbreaking work. Not the corn and soy, but what we call specialty crops, the produce, fresh produce and things like that. And then of course you have the animals who are just, you know, in this hyper efficient system live in squalor and in, you know, unremitting suffering in many cases. And we just accept that because we don't see it anymore, since animal agriculture has been largely hidden from view. Children today don't know that an animal is behind their steak, you know, or that chicken nuggets have anything to do with a chicken. I remember my son, when he was young, he was eating chicken nuggets, and yes, we would take him to McDonald's when he was little, before I knew what I know now. And I asked him, I said, so, you know, do those taste like chicken? There was a new formulation. I said, does it taste any more like chicken? And he looked at me like, it has nothing to do with chicken. It was just this little square of fried protoplasm as far as he was concerned. So it also has led to this disconnection from what we depend on.
You talked in your books quite a lot about the way that the focus shifted from talking about food, real food, to talking about nutrition. Can you elaborate?
Nutritionism, I call it. That's part of our disconnection. We've been educated to think in terms of omega-3 fatty acids and carbohydrates and refined carbohydrates and you know, protein. And it's weird. We have a head now full of biochemistry, you know, and when we look at food, that's what we see. You know, is this, you know, is this high, you know, low carb, high fat, paleo, all these ways of eating, which I think are just ridiculous and actually don't lead to any kind of dietary health, as far as I'm concerned. But that also is a result of a system that breaks food down into its component parts and then reassembles them. It's a very reductive way to look at food. But foods are more than the sum of their parts. The structure of food matters enormously. But we don't pay attention to that. We just count calories, we count nutrients. And this was all based on an understanding of what humans needed to survive that turns out to have been completely faulty, because it left out the 10 trillion microbes you share your food with whenever you eat. And the fact that they have different nutritional needs than you do, nobody was aware of that till very recently. And those critters, those bacteria and fungi and archaea and all these things, they cared deeply about the structure of food. They like fiber, it turns out, and they like many different kinds of fiber. And you know, we didn't pay attention to that. So,
and was it about policy, or like what was it about political decisions that were behind these policies and decisions that we made about our nutrition?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, the government phrases their dietary advice in terms of nutrients. You know, we have the dietary guidelines that are issued every 5 years. And for many years, they were all organized around nutrients. And that's how the conversation is. It's not just the government, though. It's advertising, it's marketing. Processed food, you know, which is the biggest part of the food chain in terms of marketing, because it's so wealthy. Basically, processed food, things like soda, things like, you know, sweetened cereals, you know, all the stuff in the middle aisles of the supermarket. These are made by breaking food down into its component parts. You take soy and corn and you turn it into all those weird ingredients that you see on the side of a package of Twinkies or something. And then you reassemble them to resemble a cake or a cereal. And then you advertise that, you know, you've got extra omega-3s or, you know, low fat or low carbs, you know, no refined carbs, whole grain. And so the language in which food is sold to us has been nutrient based now since the 70s, basically. That's when we had this low fat insanity. got started. And people don't talk about food. And food is more than the sum of its parts. And I think that that's basically, you know, we engage and we evolve to engage with foods, not nutrients. You do not need, I mean, scientists need to know all about nutrients, of course, to do experiments, to test what's healthy, what's unhealthy. But as eaters, you know, we should keep our eye on the ball, which is food.
Well, what do you think now? And I know that you wrote an article that was published yesterday, I think, under the title, "The Sickness in Our Food Supply." And you wrote about the food supply and the food system during the Corona crisis. Can you talk to us about that? What do you feel that we learned? What did we see exposed during this crisis?
Yeah, there's a famous observation by Warren Buffett, the great investor, that, you know, it's only when the tide goes out that you discover who was swimming naked. And we've learned during this pandemic that our food system is definitely swimming naked. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were shortages, spot shortages in supermarkets, and that was a result of hoarding. That was a demand problem. Everybody was collecting as much food as they could. But as time went on, we started having supply problems. And we see it most dramatically right now in the meat industry. So many meat workers, these are the people who cut the, you know, kill the animals and cut the meat, and they work under horrible conditions. The production lines are very fast. So 175 chickens every minute are coming down this line, hung from these conveyor belts, and people are cutting them up very quickly. Anyway, people started getting sick in the meat plants, and this was not surprising because they work very close together. And as meat workers have described, they can't even stop long enough to cover a cough without missing an animal going by, let alone take a bathroom break. Many of them, people in chicken plants wear diapers because they can't take bathroom breaks often enough. So you had these very large outbreaks. We've had thousands of people sick in meat plants. And then some of those states, the governors and the public health authorities closed down the meat plants. Well, what happens when that happens? Well, a single meat plant in America may be providing 5% of the pork that is eaten in America. It's a highly concentrated industry. So suddenly all the farmers in that region that fed their animals into that meat plant have nowhere to take them. And they get backed up, and they can't, the meat plants are designed to accommodate, say, a pig of only a certain size. And if it gets too big, it can't fit in the production system. Same with chickens. If you don't slaughter them at 7 weeks or maybe 8 weeks, they get too big for the system. So you've got this, the system starts breaking down. And the head of Tyson, the second largest meat plant in America, took out ads in the newspapers at the end of April, warning that the supply chain was breaking down, and this got President Trump who would not issue an executive order to force the industry to produce more test kits, which we badly need in America. He did sign an executive order to force the meat plants to reopen without any safety precautions for the workers. And so some of these meat plants are coming online, people are getting sick, but meat is now apparently a national security priority. So that's one example of what's happening. And we're seeing that this efficiency, there's a trade-off between efficiency, which we have achieved, and resilience. And resilience is built on having some redundancy in the system. So if we still had thousands of small meat plants and tens of thousands of meat farmers, a breakdown in any one of them wouldn't be news.
Wouldn't be so.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a big deal. So I think we've had a very powerful lesson here, that we've over-centralized the system. We've given these meat companies so much power that they can actually force the president to force their workers back on the line. I mean, that's crazy. Yes. And that it's time to take a look at this system and realize it doesn't have the flexibility to deal with the kinds of disruptions we're seeing.
I think one of the things that people are really confused about these days is the question, what can we do as an individual? You know, What can I do in a modernized world? What can I do to help heal the planet, or to start eating more with responsibility to ourselves, to our body, and to the environment? What is the practical things that people can actually do as individuals?
Well, we have to act as citizens, and we have to act in a certain way as consumers. I do believe that individual consumer choice can drive a lot of change in the food system. It remains highly responsive to consumer preference, and that we have built a local food system in America that's now quite big. If you combine local and organic, it's up to $40–50 billion of market power. And this has not come from any policy initiatives. This has come from consumers demanding to know where their food comes from, feeling good about how it was produced, and supporting local food systems, whether it means going to a farmer's market, choosing the organic label in the supermarket, joining a CSA to get a box from a farmer every week, buying a quarter of a steer or chickens directly from farmers. This has made a difference. It has built this alternative system. It's still tiny by comparison, but we see now that it's thriving during this crisis, that farmers markets are thriving, that people are signing up for CSA boxes in record numbers, and that the farmers in that food chain have fared better in many ways than the farmers industrially producing meat. And that has to do with the fact that it's a smaller, redundant, more agile food system. So that's one thing we have to do. The other, though, is support politicians who get it, who understand that having a meat industry so concentrated that 4 companies slaughter 85% of the beef is a danger to everybody. Yes, it may have lowered meat prices, but it's screwing the supplier, the producers who have to take the price from this oligopoly, and it creates these powers in your society that can manipulate the government. And so we need to look at, Elizabeth Warren ran on a platform of breaking up some of these big companies, and I think that has become imperative right now.
Yes, and there's a real hope things will change. Can you see a change after the corona? Because people started communicating more with local products. And I often ask people like you that have been writing about this subject for 30 years and struggling and teaching and saying these things, and still, as you said, the change is in very small scale. Do you think the pandemic can, cause a chain reaction or something that will make more people more aware of what they eat?
The honest answer is I don't know. We could go in one of two ways. There are going to be people who want to snap back to whatever was, and that are going to be sick of cooking at home and resort to restaurants and processed food as soon as they can. Or people will learn some new habits, and they'll learn the value of those habits. There's a health issue here with the pandemic also. The people at risk for serious cases of COVID-19 are people with obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. Guess what? Those are chronic diseases or symptoms of chronic disease caused by an industrialized diet with lots of processed food, lots of meat, an inflammatory diet. So, will that lesson take hold? That the Western diet that so many of us are hooked on is making us sicker and more vulnerable to COVID-19. I'm hopeful. I have to be hopeful. I wouldn't continue to work on this if I weren't hopeful. And I've seen a lot of change over the past 20, 30 years. We had it, the last administration, Barack Obama and to a greater extent, his wife, Michelle, were very conversant in these issues and took some baby steps to address them, especially with food in schools. So I think that the conversation is reaching higher and higher into our politics on the Democratic side. We're nowhere on the Republican side. We have a fast food fiend in the White House right now.
Yes.
And anyway, I don't want to go into that, but
and yeah, and I think we talked about
there's reason to hope. I mean, there is the opportunity to build a new politics around solving all the problems that this pandemic has exposed. That has to do with essential workers who we treat as disposable. That has to do with the food system. That has to do with concentration in our society, all these things. And, you know, a visionary leader could pull this all together in a very powerful politics and organize our politics around preparing for the next pandemic, making our society more resilient, and building in that suppleness that allows us to confront these kind of challenges. Because guess what? After this pandemic, here comes climate change, and the same issues of brittleness and versus efficiency apply.
Before I ask my friend Hidayah, which is a farmer who has a farm that you would be happy to visit when you come to Israel, I hope. Tell us a little bit about your last book. I know the subject has been a surprise for many people. I expected you to continue writing about the food systems.
Well, I continue to be interested in what we ingest in our bodies and how that changes us. But I moved from the belly to the head. So my most recent book, How to Change Your Mind, is about psychedelics and the renaissance of research into psychedelics, using them in a therapeutic way, as a way to heal mental illness, trauma, and there's an enormous amount of research now going on in the United States, and some of it's going on in Israel. There's a lot of interesting work using MDMA, ecstasy, to heal trauma. And that it's a very exciting area. And, you know, I'm interested in health. I mean, finally, and this book is very much about health, but it's about mental health, where we have a tremendous crisis, and the tools available to the mental health profession are really wanting. And along comes these unusual molecules that it turns out to have this amazing potential to heal. And so the book is about that renaissance, and it's also about my own experience exploring my mind using psychedelics. And I'm very excited that it's coming out soon in Israel.
Yeah, I think it's going to be published in a week or so, and I'm really looking forward to read it. I was lazy waiting for the Hebrew edition.
I don't blame you.
To be, I want to ask Karen to join Hidayah to our conversation, and we're going to talk to him a little bit more. He's going to demonstrate something that he's going to cook, inspired by your books and by these. Wonderful. Yes, and by these, you know, rules and tips you give people who want to make this change to do in their own kitchen. Hidayah, happy to have you here. Do you want to just tell a little bit about the work you do in your farm to Michael?
First of all, it was a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Ronit, and thank you, Michael. The one thing that I absorb from a conversation like this is that it's absolutely fantastic to know that people actually talk and research and write about the things that we feel inside as farmers, as chefs, and you know, intuition, just like what you said about the difference between nutrients and real food. I deal with real food, with real crops, but the understanding that what I do has a meaning behind it is actually great. Our farm, which you are all being hosted in right now, is a model farm for sustainable agriculture in Israel, which we have founded some 13 years ago, when the word sustainability mainly meant for me the ability to sustain my family as a farmer. 13 years. And you know, we've established our farm over 3 columns. One is ecological. So aside of being organic, we have solar. All of our electricity is solar. Our water are recycled. We use we use the goat's manure to fertilize the mango groves, etc. The second is social, understanding that we are not an island of our own, and that we have to have responsibility on the community in which we live, and to have a relationship with the community. Thus, we no longer export any of our produce. We used to have 70 acres of organic tomatoes for export. If you ever consumed organic tomatoes in Whole Foods in the East Coast in the winter, those were probably mine back in the day. But the most important column is the economical column. It is super important that this sustain us, our family, our families, and the families of almost 200 members, workers, employees of our farm community, that this what we're doing supports them and their families. So this is what we're doing. We're doing this through raising of goats for milk, and for we produce cheese, organic goat cheese. We have poultry for eggs, organic laying eggs. We have fruit and vegetables and mango groves and date groves and olive oil and honey and what's not. And we feel that the system in which we live is intuitively good for us. And when I read your books, I understand that there's a reasoning for all of this. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your work. I can't wait to visit.
I can't wait for your visit. And Ronit is going to bring you over for dinner. That's what I heard.
Excellent.
Absolutely. I'm going to do that. And I want to thank Michael again for this conversation. Hope to have another one real soon and here in Israel. And I want to thank the people at Mishkanot and we, of course, continue, but I just want to thank them again for the opportunity to talk to you, even if it's now in Zoom and not face-to-face. And Hidai, just tell us, what are you going to cook?
Actually inspired by but what you and Michael were talking about, and Michael's writing before, I'm going to cook for us two very simple dishes tonight. One that deals with the season, and when dealing with the season, you know, we're right in the middle between the winter and the summer. So I'm going to make us a salad, which I call a winter in the summer salad, which is going to use the last oranges of the winter and the first tomatoes of the summer for a really tasty, fresh salad that this is the season to eat it. And I'm also going to make us a shakshuka, but not a traditional shakshuka. It's a development or a takeoff on shakshuka that we serve in our restaurants, which is made of, once again, 4 or 5 ingredients. It's basically a white shakshuka using Lebanese cheese, organic goat milk, Lebanese cheese, the organic eggs, and some hyssop, fresh hyssop from my garden, from my herb garden, and just olive oil. That's enough. So let me know if you're ready, and we'll start.
Yeah, just start. And of course, these things are really inspired by the things Michael is saying in his books, right? Cook with a lot of vegetables and fruit. Don't eat a lot of meat. Meat shouldn't be, like he said, meat was a luxury for a long time. It shouldn't be part of everyday diet nowadays. Also, what are the other things that he's saying in his books that inspired you to make these dishes?
So first of all, the simplicity and the fact that it's real food. We're dealing with real food, things that you can identify when they're served on your plate. And you'll see in a minute, when I start making the salad, that you will know exactly what's in it. It is not going to be hidden in some technological or mechanical system that, you know, you're going to see the food that you're eating. You're going to identify it. You're going to know where it came from. It came from my garden, my orchard outside, and our tomato fields in the Arava. And the second thing is, once again, I love meat, I love fish, but I prefer to consume great quality, local, grass-fed meat once or twice a week even. And the rest of the time, we sustain on the food that we grow or that my neighbors grow, which is vegetarian mostly. And there's so much into it. So the diversity and the abundance of produce that we are surrounded by is more than enough to come up with a new dish every single day.
Yes.
So with your permission, I'm actually
Sure.
going to start with our salad. I'm going to choose really ripe red tomatoes. These tomatoes are from the Arava. So these are, I wanted to say the first of the summer, but these are actually kind of the last of the winter, because in the Arava we grow the tomatoes in the winter, of course. And I'm just going to slice them into rounds about 1/8 of an inch thick, half a centimeter, just like this. And the salad I'm going to make is making use of the tanginess and sweetness of the tomato, along with the tanginess and sweetness of the orange. And I'm going to add some extra zest using a red onion. So I did this with a tomato. Now I'm going to get one of those beautiful organic. You can see they don't have any wax on them or anything. And I'm going to peel the orange very easily, just like this. Now look, this is an organic orange. If you see the oranges that we often get in the supermarket, their peel is much thicker because the species that they had to develop were ones that have a long shelf life. So they have a thicker peel, and they're bigger, and some would say more attractive. But I love my oranges just like this. Let me do it actually with one more. So each one is a different size because they come from a real tree. They're not engineered in any way, and we don't mean for them to be identical. We like them the way they are. And I'm gonna, after I finish peeling this this orange, I'm gonna slice it exactly in the same way I did with the tomato. So into oval slices, once again, 1/8 of an inch in size. Just like this. Look how beautiful they are. And I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna add 1 or 2 more ingredients. So one, have these ready as well. Let me get rid of some of the, some of the peels to the compost bin. We love composting. And I'm gonna add a red onion. I've already peeled it, but this time I'm gonna slice it really thinly because I'm using it as a condiment, right? I'm not really eating so much of raw red onion. I know, Ronit, that sometimes you prefer to eat your red onion just like this with a herring and the vodka, but this time it serves a different purpose.
Yeah, I'm drinking wine, waiting for the salad. He died.
Okay, listen. Let's have a toast.
Let's have a toast.
Cheers.
Yes. Cheers.
Beautiful. So one last ingredient, I'm gonna break in half some olives. These are olives actually from this year, from this past September, October, when the olives were ready. And we make different kinds. I like these ones because they're slightly bigger, and they I can more easily take them off the pit. So yeah, so something like this. And I'm almost ready. Maybe one more.
Hidai, we didn't even have time to speak about it with Michael, but we were asked about it today when we were interviewing for the radio. People always have comments or say that, you know, organic ingredients cost so much more. But what you said today, and we didn't have time to speak about it with Michael, that it doesn't have to be like that, right?
Right, because there's 2 reasons for the extra cost. One is that at the end of the day, as Michael said in your interview, cheap food costs a lot.
Yes.
It costs in the environment, it costs in subsidies, it costs in interests of of rich people that jeopardize our interest for safe, good, local, healthy food. It doesn't really cost more to raise organic food. What costs more is regulation that is set up for regulation that is set up for conventional
industrial
food.
Agriculture. Yeah,
exactly. It costs more because there's less of it. I have to say that organic food doesn't necessarily mean traditional. Organic food often take advantage of modern techniques, of modern technology, of industrial technologies, but it uses it with responsibility, not only for the tomatoes I'm going to grow this season, but for the land I'm going to grow tomatoes on in the next 50 or 100 years.
yes.
And to you, my community, if you buy my tomato, I want you, when you eat it, to stay healthy and not to have pesticides and etc. Covering it. So it definitely doesn't have to be more expensive. And if you look at it, organic food today is much less expensive than ever in the past.
Yes.
And I think it'll get to the point that it will equalize with industrial food as long as it is in the same quality. You can never sell butter for the cost of margarine. I'm going to go back to my salad for 1 minute, Ronit.
Sure.
So now, you can set it up like a caprese, like a, roof tile, but I like it more, how would you call it? Unorganized, organized. And I'm going to add the onion as well, just like this. So I've basically replaced the mozzarella in a caprese with oranges, and I've replaced the basil leaves with onion. And you get a very Mediterranean, slightly maybe North African taste, which is the inspiration for this. So we're about ready. Now I'm going to take the pitted halved olives and set them on top, just like this. It's already looking pretty good. And now all I need is some extra virgin, excellent organic olive oil. There's never enough in olive oil, So I'm just putting olive oil on top of all of it, and it really brings everything together. I'm also going to sprinkle it with some Mediterranean sea salt, coarse, and of course some coarsely ground black pepper, just like this. And the one last thing I'm going to do, so I have 2 lemons here. One from the end of the season and one that is just starting the next season. I'm going to use the more tangy, bitter one. I want some bitterness. It smells almost like a lime. And I'm just going to sprinkle on top of this. And this is it. That's our salad. You can use a fork, but you can also use your hands just like this.
It looks great. And this is why we have to go back to normal life, because just seeing you cooking and me sitting here in Tel Aviv, I'm not sure life will be worth living if we will continue to live them like that.
I agree.
miss going out.
So I'm going to clean up real quickly here. And I'm going to go quickly to our next dish, which is going to be surprising to those of you who haven't eaten it in our restaurant, because it's super easy and it's super super tasty. I'm going to grab just a small skillet and I'm going to start a fire here. I mean, I'm not going to start a fire. I'm just going to turn on the fire. And I'm going to start with chopping an onion. So this one I'm going to peel. Now, what I'm actually doing now, you know, when we talk about shakshuka, shakshuka became a staple Israeli food. Although we all know that it originated from North Africa, mainly Tunisia, and it was not invented here in this region, right? However, at the same time, the whole idea behind shakshuka was that you take the leftovers of last night and you put it in a pan, add some eggs, and you have a beautiful brunch or a beautiful breakfast. We know the traditional or the most commonly popular one that is made of tomatoes, garlic, and some hot peppers. But there are many, many other kinds of shakshuka, mainly because shakshuka is an ancient dish, whereas tomatoes have only arrived in our area some 150 or 180 years ago. And so did, of course, potatoes and corn and other ingredients that we are used to see in our kitchen today. And therefore, shakshukas were made of meats and of greens and of many other ingredients. And I said, why not using the ingredients I have under my hands all the time, which are basically cheese products. So I'm going to start with some onion. I don't need too much, actually. I'm going to start with some onion. And I'm not using oil yet because I wanted to get a char. I wanted to get a burn before I add the olive oil. I'm going to add a few leaves of hyssop, of za'atar, that we grow in our garden. You can also use dry za'atar like this. But this is what actually gives it its unique flavor. Oh, sorry. And I'm going to add some salt at this point, which also helps the onion to get out its juices faster. Just like this. And I'm going to add some. And I'm going to let it fry for a little bit. Now, I wish I had so many more stages for this dish. So meanwhile, we can chat because we're just waiting for the onion to simmer or to char a little bit. Rונית?
I'm with you the whole time. I'm with you and I'm hungry.
The one thing I know about you is that knowing you all those years, that you're hungry even when you're not with me.
I'm hungry for good food, so it doesn't really matter. It's not a biological need, you know?
Yeah. No, I just didn't take it personally. I thought that when you see me, you get hungry, but you get hungry for other reasons as well. Anyways, so I have the onion. I don't need it to get all burned out. I just want it simmered. I want it slightly softer, on the verge of transparency. And once again, I just want the tastes out, but I like to feel the crunch. I'm not using the onion as a condiment here, but I want to feel it. And therefore, at this point, when the oil is steaming, I'm just going to add labane cheese. Now you can see this labane is hard, right? If you don't have labane, if any of our viewers now is from somewhere that you cannot source labane in, you can also use Greek-style yogurt, which is strained yogurt, basically a kind of labane, a little less tangy. And now I'm going to let the labane heat up. When it heats up, it will also spread evenly on the skillet. It's already changing its form. See? So I have the beautiful onion that's already simmering, and I have the labane, and I have the olive oil, and I have the hyssop. And the last thing I'm going to use is I'm going to use eggs, but this time, unlike in a traditional shakshuka, I'm only going to use the yolks, because the labane is going to be the whites, right? I'm going to break. I'm going to use, I think, 2 or 3 eggs in here. Once again, these are organic, free-range eggs. Sorry, the chicken are free-range. The eggs are from chicken who are free-range. And I'm going to make myself a spot here. Ah, beautiful. See, it's already becoming runny at the bottom. So I wanted to touch the bottom. I'm adding the yolk here. I'm going to repeat it with 1 or 2 more eggs. You think Michael would like this dish?
I think he would. I would love this dish. And by the way, I'm not really sure, like, you know, there's definitely a North African strong tradition that goes about shakshuka, but, you know, it's basically an egg dish. And Turkish cuisine has it, and Palestinian cuisine, of course, has a very similar, something that is very similar to what you do with yogurt. Wow, and it looks great. I never did that with labane.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, food is wandering around the world.
Yeah,
Michael,
that's the beautiful thing about it, isn't it?
So, sorry, say what?
I said the beautiful thing about food, that it's always wandered.
Yeah, and you know, you told about your family and your ancestors that just like Michael's and mine came from Eastern Europe, and they brought their foods with us that often looks to us today like traditional food, right?
Yeah.
But we all know that a lot of the food that we look at as traditional here, but also in Italy or in Greece or in places that you think food is traditionally from for ages, it always wandered and it always changes, and that's the good part about it. So this is basically the dish. I'm going to let it 2 more minutes just because, you know, out of decency to our viewers, but I would eat those eggs just now, just like that. Meanwhile, I'm going to get us. So this is, you know, this is our story, right? I'm using labane, which is Palestinian, to a dish that is inspired by maybe North Africa, maybe Turkey. And then I'm bringing a challah, a bread that originates from Eastern Europe, right? And this is what I'm going to use in order to taste my labane and report to you how good it is.
Oh,
are you ready?
Envy, yeah, I'm envy.
So it's happening.
Yeah.
Look, right from the skillet. I leave the yolk still runny. Yeah. Good thing about having a mustache and a beard is that I can remember tomorrow what I had for dinner. And this is actually really, really excellent. You should really try this at home, or come over, Rונית. I'll make this for you.
And it's quite amazing because we talked a little bit now about, you know, local food and how sometimes local becomes national food, which, you know, is a modern invention as well. And in the last couple of months, because we all faced the same problem during the Corona crisis, you know, we hardly talked about national cuisines anymore, and who does the shakshuka and labane and challah belong to? We were just, you know, more worried about where our food would come from and whether we have to import it from outside of Israel or to, you know, to have local farmers to provide it. So maybe that's one of.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that maybe that's one of the positive effects. I might be an optimistic here, but maybe this is one of the positive effects, you know, that this crisis will have, other than the fact that people are really thinking about what they put on their plates now, is that local is by no means national.
Yes, and the fact that we that people started looking back at the growers, at the farmers, at the producers, kind of made the whole national question irrelevant. It's all about food. And when food is involved, and more importantly than the food, even the meal is involved, and we sit across from each other on the table and share a plate, other things are secondary.
We will be able to share meals again around the same table very soon. This is one of the scary things. But anyway, Hidai, I want to thank you. I want to thank Michael. I want to thank all the people at Mishkanot Sha'ananim, Moti, Liran, Keren, Paulina for organizing this festival and giving us the opportunity to speak to Michael and to see you cook and to think more or to rethink about the way that the food, you know, it's important that we just think about the food before it goes on our plates. So have a good night, everyone. And I'm still looking for this dinner next time we meet.
Thank you, Rונית. It was a fascinating interview, and thank you, Michael, for this opportunity.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.